No, over here.
Welcome everyone to the Kvöldvaka live premiere event. We're really excited to have you here. We're just going to wait a couple moments for everyone to get logged on before we get started. We're really excited to have you on this journey today to share with you Kvöldvaka and the magic behind it. Well, welcome again. I'm Dane. I'm the director of Kvöldvaka, a playful augmented reality experience that you can experience by yourself out in nature, in your backyard or in the wilderness, using your phone. It is about how ancient stories and folklore of Iceland can inform you in a time of isolation, disconnect, turbulence, and climate crisis.
In Kvöldvaka, a mischievous member of the Huldafolk, or hidden people, helps you discover a hidden world and a deeper relationship to nature that has been lost. And if you're worthy, you'll see it. I'm Carol, co-director and creative technologist of Kvöldvaka, and we're excited for you to experience the first release, the magical first chapter of Kvöldvaka here at CPH Docs.
In fact, if you have an iPhone 11 or newer, you can already experience Kvöldvaka's first release with the link that we will provide at the end of this live event. But at this special event right now, we want to take you on a journey to experience some of the inspiration behind Kvöldvaka, the folklore and the magic. I'm Barna, the narrative and interaction designer of Kvöldvaka, and we will have two very special guests here tonight.
Hello.
Two of our advisors.
Hello. I'm here. I'm at CPH Docs, not?
Yeah.
So
I have a billet.
Whoa.
I'm ready to stream.
Hello.
I think I'm in the right place.
Your little friend, Dane.
Yeah.
Is this on?
Ooh, hello, friend.
Nej for søren.
Oh,
Who are you?
yeah.
And you?
Oh, I'm Barna, but why are you?
And
you?
I was just
Is that Anissa?
talking.
Oh, hello, Nisse.
Hvad for noget? Strange human magic? Oj, I must have connected to the wrong internet again. Altså Niels.
Okay. So sorry for this interruption. It seems like hidden people are already here, tuning in with you. And since we are streaming this through CPH Docs in Denmark, and I heard the accent, it might have been this mischievous Danish Nisse. Kvöldvaka is actually all about hidden people and hidden dimensions, and we will unlock some more hidden dimensions at this event. And in order to do this, we will invite you on a game. So please, right now, stand up from Zoom and try to bring some piece of nature that you have at home, like a piece of plant that I have here, or maybe a rock that you have, or maybe you have some piece of wood at home. So stand up, grab something, a piece of nature, and bring it back here so that we can play with it later. And let us know in the chat when you're ready so that we know that we can continue. Great. Flowers from Mark. Great.
Fantastic.
Rock.
Got a rock. I love
A
it.
leaf.
Surrounded by
That's
trees.
beautiful.
Yes.
Oh, that's so nice that someone is outside.
As ancient folklore tells us, we humans, like Iceland's Huldafolk, or hidden people of Iceland, are part of nature, like this rock, leaf, plant, flowers, or stone countertop maybe in your apartment or house. But there's much more to it than that. How can ancient folklore inform us, especially as we face current global crises? We have two very special guests with us that we are thrilled to introduce. Professor Terry Gunnell, who teaches folkloristics at the University of Iceland, and perceiver of hidden dimensions, Ragnhildur Jónsdóttir, also known as Raka. I'd love to invite Professor Terry Gunnell here to the stage, Kvöldvaka.
Thank you, Karen. Nice to be speaking to you all. So, what exactly was a Kvöldvaka? And you'll hear exactly what the meaning of this is afterwards. To really understand what a Kvöldvaka is, we need to go back in time to a certain extent to the beginning and the settlement of Iceland in about 870. And people coming here to Iceland were coming from the Nordic countries, and they were coming from Ireland and Scotland, and all of them brought with them ideas of a landscape that was not just landscape, not just geology, but a place that was also full of history and also full of voices in the shape of the hidden people, in a sense, the nature spirits that lived around them. When they came to Iceland, they came to a place that was hardly anybody had ever seen before. It was next to completely uninhabited, except for a few rather mad hermits from Ireland who were wandering around here and there. It was a place that had no maps, had no names, had no beliefs, no stories, nothing to it. So when they stepped onto this place, onto this land, they were entering a place that was pretty unknown in all sorts of ways. But as they went further inland, the first thing that they started discovering are signs of the fact that really this landscape is not as dead as it might seem. Elements of earlier volcanoes rising out of the ground, shapes of lava of all kinds, which initially had been alive and are now been frozen almost in fossil form. You see further types of lava here all over the country, places that made shapes in the darkness as you wandered through the landscape, appeared out of the snow, appeared out of a fog. But at the same time, they pretty soon discovered that actually it wasn't as dead as it might seem. The Nordic people brought with them stories of the idea of a world that was created from a large being called Ymir, that the gods had ripped to pieces and formed the world out of. What was pretty clear to the people coming to Iceland, at least, is that this being was actually far from dead. It was still very much in its sort of death throes. We have smoke rising from the land. We have hot springs, for example, that you can cook food in. It smells, it bubbles, it speaks to you out of the ground. Something you'd never seen, of course, in either Ireland or Scotland or the Nordic countries. And as you get here, any minute it will suddenly spring to life in the form of a geyser. At the same time, the country was covered with, in many places, large glaciers, which, as anybody knows who's bumped into a glacier, then glaciers move, they talk, they grind, they crash. So more and more this landscape was becoming a place that was not only alive, but also a place that was full of music and full of voices that one might even want to decipher in one way or another. Very beautiful, very alive, very changing all the way through the day. And of course the ice turns into water, into waterfalls, into streams, into rivers, and again cuts its way through the rocks. Look up into the sky, you've got the largest television screen in the world in the shape of the Northern Lights, which will suddenly appear out of nowhere. And then, of course, any minute you can suddenly find, as people in Reykjavik in the last few months have been experiencing, earthquakes and not least the arrival of volcanoes at the same time. This was a place that was very much alive. Now, if we step back into the houses of the people, and as you can see here, the early houses in Iceland were very actually inspired Tolkien to create the idea of the hobbit houses with sort of ground, which were really part of the landscape. Icelandic houses with turf on their roofs, but surrounded by this towering, awe-inspiring landscape that in many ways I like to compare to a malt whiskey rather than a Chardonnay in any way. It's a tough landscape. And in the evenings, the people would retreat from the landscape into their little houses made of turf and rock. And there, in the wintertime, would take place the Kvöldvaka, which is the evening wake, very, very similar to the idea of the ceilidh that the people in Scotland and Ireland will have encountered. And here people would sit around inside in the darkness, light coming from a few oil lamps, very few windows in these houses, a lot of smoke, and they would listen to stories. some of which would have come from the Bible, would have come from the Icelandic sagas, would have come from homilies and things of this kind. But also you'd have had people telling stories of things that they'd experienced. Folk tales in the form of wonder tales or fairy tales, but also a great many of them legends. And we talk about legends as in terms of memorats, which are experienced legends, or other stories like migratory legends, which have been passed on between countries and adapted to the local environment. So people there would be crowded around, working, spinning, knitting, weaving, repairing, doing all sorts of jobs, listening to stories that were told in the evening. Stories that didn't just tell them about historical events, but also, as time went on, told them about how people in the past had experienced the landscape. It meant that they were, in a sense, a form of school of tradition, of traditions that had been passed on for many, many years, beliefs, stories, activities. And they gave a strong sense of how people understood the landscape that was outside. And here we immediately get figures like the Huldufolk, the so-called hidden people, very similar to those people from Norway who would know the word huldra, or the underjordisk, the underground people, who form part of the landscape. Spirits very similar in some ways to the idea of fairies that you get in Ireland, and other forms of nature spirits. Figures that live on the edge of the environment where people were living, but would often step out and people would have encounters with them. These were people that you needed to, or beings that you needed to work with, to show respect for. In a sense, they were one of the voices within the landscape that are taking human form. Other characters we get wandering along the edge of lakes, for example, in the form of water horses. We have waterfall beings. You go along a beach and you bump into figures like the mermen in the form of the marbendit, for example, or the so-called beach creep, a fjörulalli, which would be crawling around in the darkness on the beach. Other beings that they would have talked about in the earlier times, you hear much less about them in later times, are the trolls, of course. And here you have an image created by the wonderful artist living in Iceland called Brian Pilkington. And this figure here in the middle actually is a figure called Grýla, and we'll come back to her in just a second. The ones to either side are the sort of trolls that are waiting in the landscape that would kidnap any traveler walking around, figures that shaped the landscape, brought it to life initially. Now, Grýla in the middle is a figure that all Icelandic children know from Christmas time. She is really the first feminist in Iceland who ate her first husband and has a whole pile of other figures that you'll see in just a minute. But she checks out for children at Christmas time that she wants to eat as sushi. And any bad behaved children are well aware of Grýla, which means really the growler against sounds. The people that she's picked up over time are the Christmas men. Iceland has at least 13 of these figures in every settlement. They come down from the mountains one by one at Christmas time. Initially, they would have taken sausages and meat and other things of this kind, names like curd slurper and sausage swiper, door slammer, window peeper. And of course, also in the same sort of family, we can't not mention the Christmas cat, which will eat anybody that's not wearing new underpants for Christmas, for example. It's just some of the same sort of beings that lived within the rocks. At the same time, we also have, of course, ghosts. This is a landscape where the memories of the dead will be all over the place, even as they are for Icelanders even today in the shape of pictures on their walls. But in the past, we have the dead, which would be threatening people all over the place. We have magicians who bring the dead back to life to attack people. And as you step out of your evening wake session, hearing these stories, then outside the landscape has changed. It's suddenly full again of beings that you can hear whispering in the wind, appearing in the shapes out of the snow and the fog, and figures that you need to bear respect for in your lives if you're going to get through your daily tasks. And this then basically is the way that Icelanders still, in many ways, understand the landscape that's around them. It's not just waves and sand, but it's a place that's in fact full of beings of various kinds that, as I say, one needs to show respect for. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Terry. Again, Terry is a professor of folkloristics at the University of Iceland, and he is one of the advisors on our project. Thank you so much. We're gonna go into a little exercise. So please, everyone in the audience, get your little piece of nature that you brought here. I saw a lot of interesting things like rocks, redwood seeds, plants. Someone is outside in a garden, which is actually a quite fun place to be watching this event. And just look away from Zoom like we do and try to notice its color and its texture. And you're probably living with this piece of nature for a while now. You have it in your apartment, but try to find a detail on it that you've never seen, never experienced before. And now that you had this moment, we're going to continue and we'll come back with this later.
So where we're going with this is that there are many dimensions around us in everyday life and in nature, things that are much larger or smaller than us and things that are much older or younger than us. But there's much more to it than this. And so I'm so pleased to introduce Ragnhildur Jonsdottir, who is a perceiver of hidden dimensions. So I'd like to welcome her to the stage. Welcome, Raka. How are you?
Now you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Okay. It seems that the Hultefolk are messing with the technology, so we get half of the, half of each word or something.
Yes, a world you're very familiar with. Raka, what is your relationship with the hidden beings of our world, and when did you first remember seeing them?
I've always seen all kinds of different beings, Hultefolk and elves and angels and ancestors. Actually, my oldest friend is a Hultefolk woman. We were born on the same day, she told me later. See, in a rock near my home, and we have been friends all our life. And she's of a species we call Hultefolk. They are very similar to us humans in many ways, even drink coffee sometimes. Yeah, and so I don't know anything else than being in touch with different beings. Another good friend is Frode, who is an elf. And if I describe him a little bit, he has this big nose and big ears and very deep lines in his face. And he sort of reminds of Trell. You saw the picture of Grilla before. Sort of, yeah, reminds of beings like that, except he's much smaller and much friendlier. When you look at him, you see that his deep lines in the face are actually hundreds of years of smiles. He's 900 years old, and his eyes show deep wisdom. And his name actually means someone who knows many things, Frode. And yeah, he's this wise person, but he's also very playful. And you can, like when we are talking about this project that you human magicians have been making, Kvöldvaka, Frode lights up like a kid at Christmas, and he turns like he's like a little kid. Gets very excited. There are many different beings, like I said before, and Terry mentioned the Trell, the giants in the mountains, like Grilla. They're also very friendly giants in the mountains. A friend of mine is a giant we call Skessa, female giants. And she lives in the mountain behind my house. And yeah, we drink tea together sometimes.
Raka, as you've traveled the world, do you see hidden beings in other part of the world as well? I mean, what's your
Yes,
experience as you travel?
they are everywhere, all over the world, and everywhere where nature can flourish. It could be a park or a garden, or like Barna had us find some piece of some nature in our house. There are beings connected with this. And if you walk down a street and you see a tree by the sidewalk, there is a being living in that tree. And so they are everywhere. They have different names, different stories behind them, but curiously similar stories all over the world.
Your book, you wrote, What Does It Take to See an Elf, which is a favorite. It's a big inspiration for our augmented reality experience of Kvöldvaka here at CPH Docs. Could you tell us a little more about the book and how it came about?
This book, it's actually by my elf friend Frode. And this book is called What Does It Take to See an Elf? And it's because the elves and the Hildefolk, they want us to connect again, the worlds, the elves and the humans. They say it's very important to the world, to all of us, that we connect again. Like in the old stories where this communication was back and forth. So they want to remind us how to connect. And if I read a few lines from this book,
Please.
Frode is saying, to see as elves, you only need 3 things: a touch of joy in your heart, a permission from the grown-up inside of you to allow your inner child to go out and play, and you need an elf willing to be seen.
I love that. That's amazing. And I hope we all get thousands of wrinkle lines from all the smiles in our lives. You've also been known for your environmental activism in Iceland, and there's a film, The Seer and the Unseen by Sarah Dosa, that follows your efforts to save an elf community from being destroyed by road construction. So this is not an esoteric thought. This is an active, it's an active part of everyday life, and these beings are around us and active in our lives. Maybe you could describe for us how your awareness of the hidden dimension has influenced your activism.
In that, the story which is talked about in this film, The Seer and the Unseen, it started for me with elves and Hildefolk and dwarf. They came to my house and they were very excited, or yeah, I need the word. They were worried, and they called me to come out to this lava field because an elf church, as we call them, a sacred place for those beings, was going to be destroyed. There was going to be a road made over it or through it. So I tried to help them. It ended up with me getting arrested and a lot of other people put in a prison cell, and I was not very happy with my elf friends at the moment. But no harm was done, and we got out again. And but yeah, it ended up pretty well. With,
Did it save the elf church in the
see
end?
the film. Yeah.
We'll watch for that. What would the Hildefolk want people attending this this event here all over the world on Zoom? What would they want us to know?
The main message that they want to tell humans is that if we are going to continue living on this planet, Mother Earth, we all have to work together. All of us, the elves, the Hildefolk, the humans, angels, and the animals and plants. We all have to live together. We have to find peace. We have to find friendship among us. You can be friends with trees and birds. And they say this is very important and very serious, but also a lot of fun. It is so much fun. You're never alone when you have, a friend in another world.
Well, thank you, Raka. If you can stay on, we're going to invite Terry back on, and we'll do a Q&A session here briefly with Terry and Raka. If you have any questions for Terry and or Raka, raise your hand and we can ask Terry and Raka those questions. Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Raka, for your presentations, for being here today. You've been an instrumental part of our project. So I actually have a question that I want to follow up on. You, Terry, Raka, feel free to answer as well. So we often hear about Icelandic elves in the news and in nonfiction, and often these headlines are something along the lines of Icelanders protest a road that would disturb fairies, or something like, why so many Icelanders still believe in invisible elves? So is there a between the actual folk belief of the Huldufolk in Iceland and how it is covered in the media and in news outlets?
I think it depends on which media we're looking at. If we're looking at Icelandic media, then one will regularly find stories coming up of dealing with particular rocks that have been moved and that people believe there are beings living in, horses being stolen, things of this kind coming up. The media itself within Iceland has the same sort of approach that Icelanders have to it, which is not it's interesting. It's not really surprising based on the beliefs that exist. If you go to, of course, foreign media, then of course it's always going to be different, because I'm inundated, as I'm sure Raka is inundated by foreign journalists who are coming to us and are asking about beliefs to do with the hidden people or the Álfar. And for them, to a certain extent, as I say to them, it says more about them than it says about the Icelanders when it comes down to it, because they, in many ways, are looking for something that's been lost, that was there when that they grew up with, and the stories that they had in the past that they've loved when they're reading Lord of the Rings, and it's a Fox Mulder want to believe that's really being reflected here, and certainly it's reflected in interest in series like Games of Thrones and so on. So certainly there's a foreign approach to the beliefs in Iceland, which is on one side a raised eyebrow, but at the same time a longing to get back something that's been lost, which is certainly something Tolkien himself was talking about. He was trying to bring back with the writing of Lord of the Rings. Icelanders themselves will have one way of reacting to the eternal questions when they might go into sort of performance mode. Yes, of course, we all believe. But really what one needs to do is to, what I say to the journalists is to ask an Icelander to imagine that they have a garden outside where they're planning to put a hot pot, and in the middle of that garden is a large rock, and that means blowing up the rock. And as they're about to get the dynamite ready and whatever to go around the rock, and a next door neighbor, could be Raka, looks over the fence and says, "What are you doing?" Why? Because that is an elf rock. That's where there are beings that live inside that. And then the question for the Icelanders is, are they actually going to go ahead with this or not? And that's when you find out immediately that hardly anybody in Iceland will go ahead with this, because there's a strong sense of life within the landscape. Of course, there's also strong elements of heritage that you don't want to mess with. And it's also very nice to have an elf rock in your garden when it comes down to it. But you don't want to mess with the powers that live around you. And as I mentioned earlier on, this is a very alive landscape, which would have applied to any other country in the past too.
A question for Raka from the chat. How big are the giants and how old can the hidden people be? There's also a follow-up question from another person about how do these beings manifest themselves? How do they become visible? So maybe those two questions can go hand in hand.
There are actually several different types of giants or tröll in the mountains. So they can be maybe from 3 meters or 10 meters, the different types. And they can be really scary looking, some of them, but others are really friendly. And it's good to have a big giant friend, you know, in big storms, they shelter the house or something like that. And and the second question was, how do I see them, or how do they manifest?
How do they manifest? How do they become visible?
They are visible, you know, to each other, but we need to look into another dimension, and we don't use these physical eyes. We could be looking to the side, like now I'm looking at Frode standing right next to me here, but it looks like I'm just looking at you. So they are also in different dimensions within the elf world. So you could be using different sets of eyes, different, like when you tune in an old radio. I don't know if you remember radios from the old times. Sometimes there's just scratching sound, but then you find the right radio station for the right song or something. It's tuning in like that. You can see them very clearly, but sometimes like light, flickering light, similar to your chick.
We have another question here for either of you. Is there any connection between the Huldufolk and the pagan religion, which is also strong still today in Iceland? So maybe that's referring to like the Ásatrú or something.
Yes, Ásatrúarfélagið. I'm actually a part of that. I call myself a Christian pagan or something. Yeah, but anyway, yeah, because they are part of, even though they're not called Huldufolk, they're called elves, and there are dwarves, 4 dwarves that hold up the sky. The beings are all there. The old stories that Terry Connell was talking about earlier about the big being that the world is made of, Ymir, that it's all there in these old sagas of Ásatrú.
You can say very, very, very basically, yes, certainly. But one thing we need to say, by the way, to people listening is that Álfar and elf are slightly different concepts. The way that we see the word elf in English is somewhat different. Álfar initially were we hear about in the ancient Old Norse literature, which has roots in pagan beliefs, and certainly they're almost godlike beings there that we're talking about, and then we have spirits. Natural spirits living alongside. So it's part of those beliefs. It goes back to that time, and it's lived in Iceland ever since. There's not really a break. It's not been destroyed by the church. There's this sense of the land being alive and having spirits within it. So yes.
Actually leads to another question I have. So I've found it very inspiring to learn about the tradition of Kvöldvaka, the tradition of the night wakings, throughout Icelandic history, with these storytellers traveling around the landscape as you described, Terry. And it was this oral history and this understanding of the nature and the landscape that was passed on through centuries because of this tradition. So, and I look towards our time today where there's a media landscape that informs our relationship to our natural landscape. So I'm wondering, is there a modern version of the Kvöldvaka tradition, or has it changed, or have we lost some of that? It seems to be very strong in Iceland and in northern countries, but not so strong in other parts of the world, for example.
So certainly the Kvöldvaka itself doesn't exist in exactly the same sort of way. It was the radio took over first, and then the television has taken over since. And of course, people are living in a very different way. You haven't got so many people living in the same house that we used to have in the past. So certainly that the way of hearing and receiving stories has changed. Of course, many people are getting stories on social media now. It's very difficult. The surroundings of listening to stories in these buildings in that sort of landscape, of course, has changed. But the stories are still there, and we pick them up when our parents or grandparents are reading to us as kids. You pick it up in school, you pick it up from friends, you pick it up in Iceland when you're sitting out in a hot pot at the swimming pool. You'll be picking up stories in that way. So there's all sorts of different forms of Kvöldvaka that are going on, and passing on, of course, stories and understandings of the landscape. As parents, we all drive our children around the countryside here and point out particular rocks and get the children listening to it, to rebuild this sense of the landscape being alive and being something you need to communicate with. And of course, people abroad, they have their own Kvöldvaka, and they have their own beliefs that have been created within the cities. Other beings, other modern trolls that have been created that people are warning their children about when they go out onto the streets. We all have a form of folklore living around us, just a matter of getting back to the original nature, which is much more healthy, as Raga's been underlining.
The Hultefolk have a specific role in nature. Like, how is their dimension connected to the human world? Maybe Raka, you could start with that one.
All the species have their own role in nature. And we have to remember also that we humans are nature spirits. We are part of nature. We just forgot for a while, and we need to get back there as maybe guardians, like the Hultefolk, guardians of certain places, or, you know, protectors and friends with nature. I think, yeah, if that answers the question.
I'd like to sort of pose a different sort of question too, in a different answer, or a similar answer in many ways. That in the past, of course, people, both the people of the landscape and the people who were settling it, had very similar approaches. More interesting is the sort of question they might ask us: what exactly have we done with our role in treating the landscape? And the way that we work with it.
That's incredible.
Since within the landscape, then there's a certain role that we can say that we've lost.
You know, we have a question from the audience here along those lines. They're commenting, it seems like Icelanders respond and treat their environment with greater respect to the hidden world than other places, than other countries, for example. So they're wondering, why is this the case, or is this the case?
Raka, do you want to answer first?
Yeah, it is the case, but also not. I mean, people are different here, like everywhere else. But also, like Terry said before, the land is alive, and we all know that. And if we forgot a few weeks ago when the eruption came up very close to Reykjavik, you know, you can't forget it here. The land is alive. And I think maybe that's why it's easier for us to remember the beings and to listen to nature here than maybe in other places. But also, we have to remember stories like this, even though we call the beings by different names, they're alive in so many countries. Maybe not in the middle of cities, but usually, you know, if you go out in the countryside, you can hear stories or talk to the indigenous people.
Exactly. And I think if you go to the west of Ireland, you're going to find a very similar approach there. And in west of Ireland, like Iceland, to a certain extent, there's a closer contact with the landscape because people moved into cities so late. Yeah, we're dealing in Iceland with a movement essentially around and after the Second World War. So the great grandparents that's still around at the moment, these are people that came from a landscape where there was no electric light, much closer contact with the landscape. So in a sense, these stories and the sense of connection with the landscape is much closer here than in many other countries. But it was there. It used to be there. I've spoken to people in Norway, certainly, who had the same sort of beliefs. It's just been challenged to a certain extent by Enlightenment belief, and to a certain extent, in some places, by the church too.
So we're going to have to wrap up here soon. But before we go, do either you or Terry or Raka have any last thoughts that you want to share before we move on to our next exercise?
Only that Frode wants to say how excited he is about the project that you're doing. It's amazing. And it's maybe the new way for us humans to connect with the old ways, with nature again, through our human magic like you're doing. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well,
And
thank Brody.
as Tolkien suggested, go back and take a look at your stones and your trees a little more carefully.
Thank you deeply, Terry and Raka, for being a part of this today, for being crucial parts of this project that's premiering here at CPH Docs. We've been thrilled, and I think this has been a treat for everyone on the live stream today to have you here. So for everyone else that still has questions, feel free to send in your questions through our website, kvöldvaka.world, and we can get them answered there. Well, before we move on to our next exercise, from the Kvöldvaka team, we just want to extend a heartfelt thanks to Mart Atkin, the curator of CPH Lab, to Ambelin de la Gonnerie, to Sarah Ellis, our mentor, and to the entire CPH Lab cohort. Amazing projects that was part of that program and that you can see now at CPH Docs. We're so grateful to the mentors and especially the festival. This could not have happened without, we needed every single one of those people, and it's been a fabulous journey.
Thanks, Dane. So now we're going to move into our game again. And this will have a very special importance. As Terry mentioned, Tolkien suggests to look at our surroundings, our trees and rocks in a new way. So that's what we're going to try doing. So again, get your piece of nature ready and just turn away from Zoom, go closer, and try to remember that detail that you noticed before. And now try to look for new details. Try to exclude everything else and just focus on it. Do you see some color, or maybe if you go closer, does it have a smell? Or maybe it's a rock. Maybe it has a smell, but maybe it has a texture if you touch it that you forgot. Try to spend some time with these feelings, with these emotions that you're experiencing right now and that normally you don't pay that much attention to. And if we all do this together, maybe some magic will happen.
Hello? Can you hear me? I was in the right internet. Hello, CPH Docs. See, it's easy to pay attention to nature and see the hidden dimensions all around you. I'm glad you can see me. You humans are funny. Your human magic is like hidden people magic. But we don't need technology. It's just built in. Fantastic. Yeah. Our relationship with humans has been changing for much time. Hidden beings are all over the world, everywhere where nature is allowed to flourish. It is important and fun to work with all the beings of our planet and connect with nature. And like the Nisser say, it is so important to have fun. Yeah, det var så sjovt. Now, I hear that human magic in the Kvöldvaka app might help you see some of the hidden people where you are right now. Also, how fun. I think you should go outside in nature and try it right now.